All right. Well, hello everybody. Hello in here and hello out there. Week 7. We're just banging along here. So there's several things I want to do today. I dug up some titles of previous student papers just to give you an idea of some of the things that previous students had done. Then we're going to do the discussion of the reading that you did. Then we're going to do a bit of preparation for your second data analysis. And last of all, we'll talk about your reading posts for this week, okay? So here are some of the titles. This is just a few. There's nothing meaningful or not meaningful about what I put and what I didn't put. Writing like we speak, an analysis of basic writers' inclusion of spoken discourse markers in academic texts. That's a nice one. Effects of online discourse in an academic setting. Implementing discourse analysis, investigating the formal business letter genre. So that's like a genre study. Thesis statement in English argumentative essays by Arab students before and after a workshop on writing, contrastive rhetoric. That actually turned into a PhD in the end, thesis. Small talk in the workplace, literature review, that also turned into a PhD dissertation. Text talk, a study on electronic written discourse on cohesive features. And it probably should be and cohesive features. I don't know. The discursive construction of teasing in soccer fandom, an example from Nigeria. And understanding international student silence in the graduate classroom, problems and solutions. That turned into a publication. So these are all possible, things that, some of the possible things that you can do. Picking different genres, picking different contexts, picking different aspects of discourse, okay? What we're going to do today and finish up next week is this idea of units and sequences, right? So how we create a unit of different sizes, what makes a unit rather than just a random collection of utterances or sentences, and then how we sequence discourse intonation as well into paragraphs and so on. So if we think, for example, the difference between a conversation and a lecture, right? A conversation is multi-party or dyadic talk. A lecture is monologue talk. So we can see things in lectures like spoken paragraph units, and we're going to be looking at this particular issue next week. Whereas in conversation, we might be looking at different kinds of units. We already looked at Enron, so we can look at things like email versus formal letter writing, where we might look at each unit would have different ideas of grammatical structures, right? Narrative versus a news bulletin, the different settings, what you have to do to set a narrative up and then tell the story, versus an information loaded news bulletin that doesn't have that narrative sequence. And so it goes on and on and on. So each of these genres, each of these ideas of ways of looking at the discourse sort of implies a different kind of unit, right? You pick the unit that best suits that genre or that context. So as a starting point, you can look at the units that she gives you. Now, these are not all the units that are possible to have, but she starts with units that you would have heard of. Classic sentence unit, so one subject, one predicate. A clause, so a part of a sentence, either dependent or independent. T-unit, have you guys heard of T-units before? So T units are used in SLA to often count the complexity of learners' writing. So a T unit is the main clause plus any embedded or dependent clauses that go with that. So what we see when we look at T units in non-native speaker development, that T units become longer and more complex. So T units is one form of measurement of how morphosyntactic, or particularly syntactic grammatical development, is moving forward in learners. Line. So we're going to do that in our second data analysis. You're going to split everything into lines. Intonation unit is, well, if you look at intonation unit with chafe, and then you look at tone group with crystal, you'll find that there are similar ideas between the two. The real difference is that tone group with crystal uses prosodic features to define itself. And in the intonation unit, prosodic features are used in its definition, but it also takes in this idea of focus of consciousness. So when Chafe was talking about an intonation unit, he had more of an idea of how information structure, so focus of consciousness, went into that unit. Whereas a tone group doesn't really have anything to say about that, right? So although both of them, you know, surrounded by pauses, final rising, final falling intonation, the chafe unit has this additional structural component of a focus of consciousness. Center of interest is also a similar idea for chafe in terms of adding this informational component. So again, cognitive structural. In this case, although intonation is part of the definition, it's not as clearly defined by intonation as an intonational unit. Chafe has spent a lot of his career trying to work out how we organize utterances in the brain, basically. He's very interested, and you read some of the stuff that he had done. He's very interested in how we hold things in the brain, how much we hold on to, and how this is part of discourse. Utterance, you've got Graham Crook's stretch of speech with a single intonational contour. So I had one of those right at the very beginning of our class. I told you that something like dude was a single utterance, right? In that case, it's a single utterance, stretch of speech with a single intonation contour, bounded by pauses and or constituting a single unit of meaning. So when he says a stretch of speech, it can be as short as dude, right? It can be that short, that's your utterance. Tone group we just talked about. In those of you that are taking sound systems or have taken sound systems, this is what we talked about in terms of tone unit. So tone group, tone unit, basically, or tone group, tone unit. Sometimes it's called an intonation group as well. So there are a couple of different ways, but again, that really is focused on the prosody. I mean, there's an assumption that the prosody aligns with other issues. So it aligns with the syntax, it aligns with the semantic meaning, but the definition is in the prosody, not in the semantics. And finally, TCU's tone constructional units, which is very specifically a CA, a conversation analysis measure, was developed by Sachs and Schlegloff, and it very specifically has a very specific definition within CA that has the idea of an end of a TCU is a transition relevance play, so a TRP. So this is a very theoretically specific kind of unit, which a lot of people use as soon as they start looking at conversation. Okay. Did anyone have any questions as they read about those units or different kinds of units? So they're very much the single kind of unit. What we're going to do this week is look at these single kind of units and then and some cohesion within those and between those. And then next week we're going to look at the paragraphs and the larger units that are in the second part of your chapter.
I have a question.
Yes, Mimi.
These units. So whatever our choice is going to be where our framework is and what our question is, or we can just pick and choose?
Yeah, I mean, yes, basically, to the first one, not the second one. If you're doing conversation and one of the things you're interested in is turn, transition, places, you might definitely use CA. Now, we're looking at something called system constraints, which is not within CA, so you don't have to use a hardcore CA, you know, TCU idea. But yeah, the idea is, what are you most interested in showing? For example, if you're most interested in showing that prosody, syntax, and semantics align, then you would have to do some kind of centers of interest or intonation unit that was included more than single prosodic cues, because you're actually interested to say, okay, if I find a prosodic cue, I can also look inside that unit and see a focus of consciousness, for example, so a structural and a semantic view. So it really totally depends on what it is that you're looking for. Yeah. Good question. Now, I would argue that the best units are the ones that give you the best information. I mean, my work leads me to believe that as we talked about before, that discourse cues align with each other, right? And there's a redundancy in discourse cues, so that I would expect prosodic cues to align with semantic information and syntactic information. Chafe goes sort of one step further than that by talking about these foci of consciousness. He has foci of consciousness, then he has foci of semi-consciousness. So if you're interested in that, you do that reading first before you went off and did that kind of thing. All right, so what we were going to look at today is the order of information. That's the first thing she did, was look at this idea of new and old information. Some of you that have been in pragmatics, this is going to be a review for you. But the idea is that information isn't organized randomly. It's organized by different principles, and in English we tend to organize it by old information first and new information last within an utterance, right? So old information is also called given information. It's also referred to as common ground, or shared information, or topic. And then the new information that's likely to appear at the end is called comment, new information, not common ground, not shared, core information. All of these are different possible terminologies. The only reason I include them there is because you might hear it described differently, but from your own perspective of understanding this issue, you're looking at the difference between new and given, old and given, which is like common ground, versus new information, which is not common ground. And the way that that is established is by pragmatics. So if I'm talking to Nana, for example, I have a model in my head of information that I think Nana probably already knows, and information and that Nana and I share, and information that is probably new to Nana, right? And that we don't share, okay? So depending upon who I'm talking to, this area of old, given, or shared knowledge kind of can get bigger or smaller, right? If I'm talking to my sister and brother, we grew up 3 years, 2 and 3 years apart. I have a huge shared set of information that I can assume that they understand, not only about our family, but about the culture that we grew up in, the times, the music, the films, the culture in England, and so on. All that sort of is inside my head as shared with them in a way that it is not inside my head as shared with Nana. But with Nana, we're sharing other things, right? With Nana's teaching sociolinguistics to the undergraduates, so I know that we share the syllabus understanding and so on. If I say 358, she's not going to say, what do you mean 358? She's going to say, yes, ENG 358, that's the sociolinguistics class that I'm teaching, right? So that is the reason that it's pragmatics. It's, although we can assume it's either shared or not shared, the specifics of that information are sociolinguistically and socioculturally and individually assigned, right? So obviously this becomes super important when we start talking about cross-cultural information, because often we might assume that something's shared and it's not shared. Actually, in fact, Nana, you came up with a great example today, and I'm going to sort of say it because it's loud, the mic is louder here, but Nana was a bit surprised, I might get this slightly wrong, when she went in her first American classroom where she was the instructor's helper. She wasn't the instructor, but she was the instructor's helper. And she watched the instructor give back papers that the instructor had graded. And she noticed that the instructor was sort of covering up the point at which she had put the grade, and then also putting it flat down with the grade covered on the desk so that each individual student could look at their own. And Nana, tell us why that was weird to you. Speak loudly.
Because it's weird because in my culture, grades are announced in the classroom. So for example, the teacher would say, Jade, excellent, 18 over 20 in front of everyone.
Right.
Mimi, very good, 15 over 20. And Shihu, 0 over 20. Like even if yeah. For example,
She's got a great sense of humor.
Even if the grade is so bad, the teacher would still announce it.
Right, right. And this also happened in England too, actually. All our grades were posted on the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, so everyone can see what you get and what you didn't get. Yeah. Whereas in this country, especially with FERPA and everything else, it's like it's all protected information. But it's not just legally protected. Also within the socio-cultural environment of a classroom in America, you know, students would die if you suddenly said, you know, Nana got 19 out of 20 and she had got 2 out of 20. So let's talk about their study strategies, you know, whereas in England, when I was in school, that wouldn't have been such a weird thing to, you know, to do. So, yeah. So that's great. So that's some of the, and of course it hadn't occurred to Nana until she saw this happening. So if she had walked straight into a classroom as a teacher, you might have made this error, correct? Yeah, so because you just assume that certain things are shared when they're not. Yeah, and we've talked a little bit about that with the Gumper's work. Okay, so as an example of this within an utterance or a sentence, shared or new, we've got Mary bought a book. So Mary is the theme. Mary is the known information. We assume that the addressee knows who Mary is, or that the conversation is about Mary. The current conversation is about Mary. There's a transition with bought, more new information, but not completely new. This would be something that Schaaf would start to begin to refer to as semi-focal information. So if you are interested in that, you can look at that. And then the ream, which is the new information, the book, okay, a book, that should say. So Mary bought a book, right? Now, that's as opposed to saying something really marked, like a book was bought by Mary. A book, that's what Mary bought, right? In the case of Mary bought a book, you have this very typical visual representation of old or less important information at the front end and highly communicative information at the back end here, right? And structures like this that fail to follow that unmarked structure are considered to be very marked, right? So can you think of a context in which you would say a book was bought by Mary, or a book, that's what Mary bought?
In case someone didn't hear or was confused, then you're clarifying in cases of clarification.
Good. Good. So someone said a fishing hook. Mary bought a fishing hook. And you're like, no, book. That's what Mary bought, right? A book was bought by Mary. Can't even think of any.
I'm thinking like maybe in a context where we're talking about gifts, like we're stressing on the object itself. So a gift.
Yes, you could say, yeah. Still bizarro though, yeah. You could say the book was bought by Mary, meaning that you actually, as you say, you have a gift, you have, oh, who bought the book? The book was bought by Mary, right? Yeah. So in that case, the book becomes the, who brought the book, right? So now the book is down here and the Mary is up here, right? But this is super unusual, right? Because usually we focus on the agent or and not the patient or the room, right? So again, we know that there's an unmarked construction, what we would call a construction that typically happens, because we recognize that we have marked constructions to change the information around, right? This is in English, obviously. So we have their sentences. There is something I need to tell you, right? Versus I need to tell you something. Clefs, which is what you have back here, a book, that's what Mary bought. It's Mary who was elected president. Extraction, it's well known that Mary is famous versus that Mary is famous is well known, which is kind of awkward. Fronting objects or complements, trouble was what they got, right? So, or a fronting predictor, publicize it, they did, which sounds like Yoda, right? That's because it's a theme and remix around. So that's the most marked of choices. And there you can think of contexts in which some of these constructions might appear. And one interesting thing those of you that are particularly interested in syntactic structure, this is one nice thing that you can do. You can look at their constructions or cleft constructions or fronting, but certainly their constructions and cleft constructions. You could go to a corpus, right? And you could, if you have the whole corpus, not like Enron, but one where you can search the entire corpus, you can actually search a concordance lines for these, you know, their sentences, cleft sentences, it extraction sentences, and say, why are they using that here, that marked construction, as opposed to an unmarked construction? For those of you who might be interested in syntactic development, that's a great, you know, topic to look at. And you can look at it, for example, if you have a children's corpus, you can look at what point that those syntactic forms start to appear, native, non-native differences, and so on. So it's and then you can start getting a sense of why specifically and in what context specifically people spontaneously choose to use these marked constructions. All right, so the other thing that your book did was really talk about how texts hold together. And we have looked at this before. We have looked at the difference between repetition to hold a text together versus random repetition that doesn't hold the text together. And in fact, she gave you some nice examples of that in this chapter. She gave you some examples from, like, for example, theatre of the absurd. So Harold Pinter's The Birthday Party on page 120. Do you want some tea? Say please, please. Say sorry first. Sorry first. No, just sorry. Just sorry, right? So this is this idea of, it's not just repetition. It has to be a certain kind. Or the birthday party, I've got your cornflakes ready. Here's your cornflakes. Are they nice? Very nice. I thought they'd be nice, right? Psychotherapist and her client. I'll be the client, and Mimi, you be the psychotherapist, Marion. He thinks he's doing me a favor, I'm afraid, by letting me get on my feet financially as long as I'm doing $10 a month better than I was doing before. They don't have to consider anything else.
So this father is not a real good father?
Well, he's helping his kids out.
You don't want to be one of his kids?
I don't want to be one of his kids. I never have told him some of those things if he hadn't asked me. Yeah, so
Right.
you can tell that this is sort of building repetition in a different kind of way. All right, good. So what's weird and what's well-formed is what underlines the discussion of cohesion in discourse and cohesive texts. So well-formed texts are not simply a collection of sentences. They're sentences that are put together because they're coherent and cohesive. Coherence we're going to look at next week as part of the narrative and paragraph focus. This week we're going to focus on cohesion. So the primary focus here is on morphosyntax with cohesion. Now, we are going to look at some prosodic cohesion next week, but essentially the focus with the foundational work of Halliday and Hassan has been on looking at morphosyntactic devices. Why? Well, it's easier to look at written transcripts than it is to listen to conversations. So, yeah. So here are some of what in cohesive terms are surface structure elements. So pronouns. What do we mean? Can you give me an example of how that might be used as a cohesive?
Instead of just saying the name over and over, we use pronouns.
Yeah.
For anaphora.
Good, anaphora. Good. So Mary bought the book she was interested in, right? So that's an idea of a cohesive element between two sentences. Articles.
Use of the versus and to give like new and old information.
Okay, good. So have I given you the example of you go under a bridge or the bridge? Yeah. So depending upon whether it's new information, you'd say a bridge, and if you've already mentioned the bridge, you say the bridge, and that way we understand that it's the same bridge, not a second bridge. If you said a bridge again, we'd think you mean another bridge, right? Bridge number 2, yeah. Adverbials, you've got examples there on the one hand, on the other hand, linking two propositions together. Conjunctions, coordinators like and but, lists, parallelisms we looked at last week with Sal, and or anything like the I have a dream, one day we will, da, 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 da. Explicit markers, such as chapter and section titles, and noun phrases. So this is from Sal's book. Napoleon was a great general. The winner of Marengo was proud of his reputation. Bonaparte was also known for his habit of keeping his hand on his stomach. It is believed that the emperor's digestive problems were the reason for his well-known pose, right? So in one set of sentences, it's Napoleon, winner of Marengo, Bonaparte, and emperor, all applying to the same person. Yeah. So another very typical cohesive device is ellipsis, right? So when and she talks about ellipsis in the book when you have something elided from the sentence. So in this case, what did you say? Nothing, right? So we expect there to be a ellipsis in that case, because recoverability is semantic. It's a pragmatic semantic problem. What did you say? Nothing. If I said nothing, what's difference between what did you say? Nothing. What did you say? I said nothing.
This is like a little bit like sort of, to me it comes to be like a sort of aggressive thing. I said nothing, right?
Yeah, it is aggressive. It does sound aggressive. Why does it sound aggressive, do you think?
Because I guess the shared information is it's I, so you're not
Right.
insist on emphasize on the I said.
Right. It's overly emphatic, and it's overly emphatic because you're putting in information that you expect to be elided, right? Like why? What, you remember what we talked about last week, this idea of you're going to read something into everything. You don't just ignore it. You assume that if something's happening, it's meaningful. So in this case, if you're adding that back in again, when normally we wouldn't expect you to, why are you adding it back in again? And it sounds overly emphatic to add it back in, and sounding overly emphatic makes us sound overly aggressive, right? So there you end up with that perception. Again, if you add that in with other discourse cues, you might find yourself, with a problem. So these are some of the reasons that that's important. Now, the one that you're going to focus on for your reading post, and the one that's most commonly discussed when we talk about cohesion, is lexical cohesion. So let's start you off by looking at page 117, figure number 4. That's what we're looking at, page 117, figure number 4. And what this is an example of repetition of the lexicon to create lexical cohesion. So the student says, keep it simple. The teacher repeats, keep it simple. Okay, can you be a little more specific? The students say vocabulary, different vocabulary to make it interesting. Teacher, okay. Use non-technical vocabulary, okay? Is technical vocabulary ever okay for a lay audience or a general audience? So you can see the repetition being built, and in what ways is it being used in this particular example? Why is the teacher using so much repetition?
Because wants to make sure that the idea is being sort of conveyed to the student.
Mm-hmm.
Get
what else?
It's like an informative way of telling the students what to do exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Is it used corrective feedback?
Well, it's not corrective. You're on the right idea, though. What's the feedback being given?
To make sure that there's no miscommunication, like refer to the same thing, like kind of a clarification.
Yeah. All those things have something to do with it, but I think what is happening here is this idea of validation. So a lot of times when we do lexical cohesion, particularly when there's a power differential, it's an issue of validation. It's to validate the non-powerful party, right? So we see this kind of thing happening in a lot of institutional discourse. Teacher, student, doctor, patient, things where if the powerful participant wants to validate, they will tend to repeat not just lexical items, but also syntactic structures from that, and also prosody as well. But everything else you said is also true. You know, you are, by validating, you are saying, okay, I'm validating this, now I'm pushing you to say something else, right? Keep it simple, validate that. Can you be a little more specific? Validate, right? So what was interesting is you have this original work by Halliday and Hassan, and then this guy called Michael Hoey came along. I don't know, probably you've not heard of him. He was a British guy. He is a British guy. I think he's still alive and kicking. And he decided that he wanted to build a whole theory around this idea of lexical cohesion. As far as he was concerned, you could judge the strength of relationships between different propositions on the basis of their lexical cohesiveness across the whole text. And this could be done with spoken text or written text, okay? So this is an example of his idea, and even though there's a gap between 3 and 4 and 5, the gap was just because I had to grab the screen. There, in fact, it's one paragraph, okay? So a drug known to produce violent reactions in humans has been used for sedating grizzly bears, Ursus arctos, in Montana, USA, according to a report in the New York Times. After one bear, known to be a peaceable animal, killed and ate a camper in an unprovoked attack, scientists discovered that it had been tranquilized 11 times with PCC or angel dust, which causes hallucinations and sometimes gives the user an irrational feeling of destructive power. Many wild bears have become garbage junkies feeding from dumps around human developments. To avoid potentially dangerous clashes between them and humans, scientists are trying to rehabilitate the animals by drugging them and releasing them into uninhabited areas. Although some biologists deny that the mind-altering drug was responsible for the uncharacteristic behavior of this particular bear, no research has been done into the effects of giving grizzly bears or other mammals repeated doses of PCC. I realize as I'm reading that, I'm saying bear, and you guys say bear, right? Grizzly bears. Okay, so give me some of the lexical cohesive things that you just sort of, that pop out to you across the paragraph.
Repetition of bear.
Okay, good. And it's, there's, what else have they done? How else have they referred to bears?
Description, like peaceable animal.
Right. Where's the pronoun that refers to the bears?
Them.
Good. Them. So in the fourth sentence, we have them replacing bears. Mm-hmm.
And then we started with a drug, and then
Good. We have a drug known as PCC, and then how often, what else, how do they refer to that later on?
they just like mentioned the name of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think I did.
But then they call it in 5 the mind-altering drug, right?
Yes. Oh.
Mm-hmm. What else? Anything else?
We have a few adverbials in there, like although.
Good. Yes, good. Okay, that link the propositions together. Good, good. Okay, so what Harry did was take something like this and then build something like this, okay? In which what he would do is connect find connections between each sentence by using, so for example, in this connection, he's got produce in sentence 1, causes in sentence 2, right? Every time you said bears, he's got bears everywhere. That was the first thing you guys noticed, that there was bears everywhere. Okay. Humans everywhere, right? So you can follow these lines and see. And this was his. So then, based on this, he said that one of the sentences didn't fit the other 4. So if you go back to this one and have a look, is there any sentences that you think, as you reread sentences 1 through 5, take a guess and see which one you think didn't fit? Let me give you a minute to do that. Based on his theory, this is. Okay, so which one do you think is lexically least cohesive?
3.
3. Mm-hmm. That's what he says. Lexically, the least cohesive is 3. because it doesn't have enough. All the others have 3 or more ties, and this one has less than 3 ties. So this is a way in which he says that you can aesthetically and semantically judge texts and how well they're put together, right? For your reading, yes.
Is that analysis done manually, or it's used through a software that?
He did this back in the 1990s, and he, as far as I know, did this manually. Yeah. I mean, he was developing a theoretical model, not a database model. He was developing a theoretical model to say, we know lexical cohesion is important. Can we say how important? You know, can we give parameters to that importance? Like, not just saying that lexical cohesion is good, but what kinds of, you know. So he chose to do it by the number of links between, that was his theoretical model.
And what makes him say that 3 is?
Well, that's an excellent question. You're going to download and read the article by Tyler that's included in your packet. Oh, I had it a minute ago. Here it is, where she talks specifically about this idea of HOEs, about how lexical repetition creates cohesion in discourse. And she takes that same paragraph and she's in fact going to argue against it. And so for your reading post, you're going to read her argument, and in your reading post, summarize why she wrote the article. She's very clear on what she wanted to do, what her argument is against the HOE model, this idea that you have bonded sentences by 3 lexical repetitions, what evidence she uses to make the argument, and what her conclusion is regarding lexical repetition. Okay? All right, so that's what we're going to do from the reading for this week. That takes you to about page 120. And then next week, we're going to do the paragraph, episodes, and narrative coherence part of the chapter. So are there any questions or concerns for this part of the chapter? Okay. Then in that case, we are going to talk about what you're going to do for your second data analysis. For your second data analysis, you're going to be looking at conversations, the genre of spoken discourse, and you're going to be looking at Goffman's idea of system constraints. Again, this idea of Goffman is someone who's very famous also in pragmatics. This idea of the subset where we come between pragmatics and discourse analysis because of language in use. So what you're going to do is download, which you can do now. Those of you that are at home, you can download this attachment that says System Constraints and Conversation, and it's an old-fashioned handout. And what you'll see is Goffman's idea of universal constraints, and he had 2 kinds of constraints. One was system constraints and one was ritual constraints. Now, ritual constraints or social constraints are what we've talked about thus far. So the different ways in which different speech communities socially, culturally organize their communication rituals, right? System constraints have to do with the system itself, like how the system operates, how the system of conversation operates. So, for example, what we know is that we have to have expected opening and closings of conversations or topics, right? We know that typically we have back channel signals. We know that if we don't, for example, get back channel signals, I'm watching Nana nodding her head right now. If we don't get back channel signals, we worry that our message is not going through, right? Our message is a system issue. It's not a understanding or a sociocultural issue. It's a, are you hearing me issue? Is the system clear and working, right? Turnover signals, acoustic adequacy. So that means that messages need to be hearable and interpretable. So we have systems in place to repair if things are not hearable and interpretable, right? So what's a systematic way that we indicate that something is not hearable or interpretable?
Facial expression.
Okay, facial expressions is one. Huh? Here's another one. What is another one? What did you say? Right, these are all systematic ways to say there's something gone wrong with the system. I didn't hear you properly, right? It wasn't acoustically adequate. Or I thought I heard you, but if what I'm interpreting is what you said, then I didn't hear you, right? Because it makes no sense. I hear this thing, I try and interpret it, it makes no sense. So something's wrong with the system itself, okay? Bracketing. So this idea of saying, hold on a second, you know, I'm talking about one thing, but then I have a side sequence. I always go the wrong way. Non-participant constraints. So this would be things like ambient noise, moving from being a non-participant to a participant. So if you guys are looking at multi-party conversation, how does somebody get in, right? So let's say I'm talking to Nana and Jade wants to say something. How does she, what systematic way does she use to get in, right? Does she interrupt? Does she, you know, go, you know, so we stop because we're like, why is Jade going, and then she gets in, right? So this is what you're looking at, very basic systemic structures, okay? How do we do conversation? And if you're not sure what I mean, these are all the examples that you can use, but think about it in terms of children. Okay, it takes children a while to learn how to do conversation. For the longest time, they don't understand that they're supposed to answer you if you ask a question. They have no idea how to get inside a conversation. They run up to you and say, "Mommy, mommy, mommy," and mommy says, "Wait, I'm talking to Auntie Lucy. Wait until I stop," right? So they have to learn how that system works, right? If they don't understand something, they often don't say anything at all, and you don't understand that they don't understand until later on when they tell you when they're supposed to have done something. So they have to learn how to say, what did you mean, and so on. So all these things are part of learning language and part of learning the business of conversation, okay? So that's what I want you to look at for your second data analysis. So this is an example of some of the things that you can look at in terms of the business of the system itself. How is the system working? In what ways is it working? In what ways isn't it working? Okay. Now, if you record a conversation with a child, that's often fun because then you can look at the ways in which it isn't working and the ways you know in which it isn't working because it's not matching the system that you're, so you can look at the things that are not happening. Same with non-native speaker, native speaker interaction. You can look at anything that's not working in the system. There's something, for example, called the let it pass principle that often occurs with non-native interaction, where non-native speakers don't really understand, but they don't want to keep saying, I'm sorry, what? So they sort of let it pass, and they hope that it doesn't come back to bite. You know, that most things, hopefully you'll understand in some other way before. So you can have a look at any of those kinds of things. So here's the instructions for that second data set. What you're going to do, so it's signals in discourse, basically. It's how do you interpret the signals? What's the system, you know, and there's a system constraint on signals in the sense you have to be able to hear them, and then you have to be able to interpret them, right? So record a conversation, if possible, with a non-native speaker of English or a different variety of English. It's better if you are not one of the interlocutors in the conversation, okay? It can be dyadic or multi-party. You can be one of the conversationalists if you're having a really hard time finding someone to record. But remember, you only need approximately 2 minutes, basically 1 to 2 minutes, particularly if it's a multi-party conversation. After about a minute or so, you're probably going to have enough. So you can record for any length of time. You only need to get that small segment, okay? So even if you're recording and you say to people, I'm recording this now, as long as you keep it running for, you know, keep your phone running for a long time, you can pick any 1 or 2 minute segment out of that. And what we know is that the longer, you know, the more they get into the conversation, the less they remember that they're being, you know, so you don't have to take that first minute where half the things they say are, oh no, you didn't record that, did you? You can wait till later on. Remember also, it's not illegal to record without them knowing. So you can be sitting at the lunch table and then record, but then you have to ask if you can use that recording. But it's not illegal just to start recording, okay? So you don't need an IRB for this because it's a pedagogical exercise for a classroom. However, you can't use it for anything else, obviously. So ideally, what you do is you sit somewhere, set your, you know, in wherever it is you're doing in your daily life, set your cell phone recording. I mean, you know, with wherever you're at the lunch table, whatever. And then after you've got about 10 minutes, stop recording and then say, hey, I've got this exercise to do. I just recorded. Do you mind if I use the transcript, you know, that I'm recording this from? Okay. So, transcribe approximately 2 minutes. And as I say, that if it's a multi-party conversation, 1 to 2 minutes is fine. If it's just dyadic and it's kind of slow, you know, make sure you've got that 2 minute window, okay? And then you're going to transcribe it following the transcription systems that are given also in your week 7, which is this Atkinson and Heritage, right? So the first thing that you do is transcribe orthographically, which means that you literally write down the words that people say, and you can transcribe it just writing them down, okay? Then you go back and you start looking at some of the linguistic features that are here, right? So, and it gives you the transcript systems that you need to use. So if 2 utterances start at the same time, you indicate it in your transcript this way, right? If an utterance overlaps, so Tom says, I used to smoke a lot, and Bob says he thinks he's real tough, and it overlaps, you do that overlap symbol at the point at which they overlap, right? Contiguous is also called, some of you might have heard this called latching. Latching just means there's literally no gap. So he doesn't say, I used to smoke a lot, he thinks he's real tough. It says, I used to smoke a lot, he thinks he's real tough. You know, and that's a latched utterance, 2 utterances latched together, okay? Gives you all these things that you need. I'm not going to go through each one. for the pauses, most of you probably, I mean, you can use Pratt to do this, but I don't really mind. You know, you don't have to do the numbering if it's less than a second. If it's more than a second, so this is a second, this is 1.3 seconds. That's a long time in a conversation. So if you can count 1 Mississippi, then you can put a second, right? But if it's less than that, I don't need you to identify the exact. So untimed pauses are here. And you can just put them in double parentheses as pause, right? Actually, got the wrong way. Now, there's some characteristics of speech delivery. What happened? The more lengthened the syllable is, the more colons you can use. I'm so sorry. Really, I am, right? That's how you indicate that lengthening. And then you've got other punctuation marks here for the intonation. A period if the voice falls, a comma if it's continuing, a question mark means a rising tone. It doesn't necessarily mean a question, it means a rise, right? Exclamation point means, oh no, right? So you can do marked shifts in register. What this talks about is talking about register. So I am, however, very fortunate in having a marvelous deputy, right? So that's a register issue. Emphasis, it happens to be mine, right? So I think you can see, now you don't necessarily have to use all of these all of the time, right? There's a lot of them. But I want you to really get a sense of, now, notice here, we've got gaze, direction. I am not requiring that you video. So you won't be able to use gesture, facial expression, or gaze. If you want to, you can video and then add gesture, gaze, and facial movement. It's up to you. Okay, you can do that, and it gives you the things that you need if you do that. Okay, but you don't have to. It's perfectly fine to start. We're going to start your discourse analysis career without having to deal with all of it. We're just going to have the channel, the audio channel. But if you want to do multi-channel, audio, visual, whatever, I'm certainly not going to say no. Okay, but you're required to do the audio channel only. Okay, so this gives you everything that you're going to need in terms of transcription symbols. If there's one that you realize you need and you can't find in here, then shoot me an email and let me know, and I'll help you out, okay? But the best thing to do is print this out and use it as a resource, you know, not sort of read it per se, but have it as a resource for, as you do the transcription. Now, the transcription itself, if you record it on a cell phone, does it record as an MP3 or something?
You can then
You can then change it into an MP3. So if you look, I don't know if this is going to work. There are several different things that you can use to transcribe. The one that I always use is not Spund, but Sound Scriber.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Sound Scriber is a program that you can download from, it's from the University of Michigan. It's great. It's not going to hurt your computer. You can download it, and then it will allow you to put in a digital file, and it allows you to play. So, for example, you say 2 seconds, rewind 3 times. and then press play on in the SoundScriber app, and it will replay those 2 seconds 3 times so that you can orthographically transcribe it really, and then it will move on to the next 2 seconds and replay those 3 times. And so this way you can move through your transcription, right? So now this is not the only electronic transcription helper that there is. Okay, there are other electronic transcription helpers. I'm not sure that there are any that will do a basic orthographic transcription for you. I don't think so, but if anyone finds anything fantastic like that, let me know. I mean, there are apps like Dragon Talk, for example, which supposedly you put in the speech and it gives you the transcription, but Dragon Talk has to be trained to a certain voice. It won't just take any voice, and so you can't use something like Dragon Talk because it won't recognize half the words, if anything, because it's not trained on the voices that you're using. But if there's anything else that anybody knows of where it will orthographically transcribe, and then obviously you have to go back through and correct all the errors, but you still probably need something like SoundScriber, because you're going to have to slow down that conversation and look at it in pieces in order to get some of these falling intonations, rising intonations, and elongations and so on. So you need something to help you slow that thing down, which is what SoundScriber does. Okay. Again, if you have any specific questions, particularly anybody out there about any of that, shoot me an email, okay, and let me know what it is that you're concerned about. Okay. All right. So, okay. So each line that you transcribe has to be numbered, and that whole transcript goes into the back of your assignment as an appendix. Inside the assignment, okay, which there's no absolute rule for length of the assignment. However, the analysis should be no less than 2 pages of double-spaced text plus the appendix with the transcription, okay? So when you discuss the analysis, you use the line numbers, right? So you say, what we can see is that, Lucy, in line 3, Lucy misunderstood Nana saying it's this, because then Lucy in line 4 says this, and then Nana in line 5 says da, da, da. So that way I follow everything, not just in the text, but in the line numbers of your transcript. Okay? Now, typically what we do with line numbering is if Lucy has a turn and it will fit on one typed line, that's line 1. And then Mimi has a turn, and that's line 2. And then somebody else has a turn or whatever. Now, if Mimi's turn is too long for one typed line, then you put it 1 and then you finish her turn in line 3. And then line 4 is Lucy again, or Jade again, or whatever. So if you have one person who has a really long turn, you can give them all those lines, right? So Mimi's turn goes from line 3 to line 6, and then at line 7, it's the next person's turn, right? That's typically how you want to do that. So you don't have to organize it by 1 unit per line or anything like this. Let's just do it by turns, okay? And then for your analysis, you're going to use the Goffman systems constraint as a guide. Discuss the characteristics of your conversation in terms of the system, right? How's the system working? What's happening in the system? Refer to the line numbers on your transcript as you discuss the different system constraints that you characterize. Okay? questions? Yes, Mimi.
Mine is a teeny one. So for the notation marks, where can we find them? I'm trying to see if they're on Word or the notation marks that you just showed us on the art.
They're all on a regular
On a regular
PC. Yeah, they're all. That's the whole point of them. They're all on a regular PC. You know, you'll find these arrows under symbols, and you know there shouldn't be anything that doesn't appear on a regular PC.
I thought there was a special.
Yeah, Nana.
For the pause between two parentheses, when do we use the word pause? When it's longer than 1 second, or when we just don't want to mention?
Yeah, that's a very good question. What do they say on here? Okay. Intervals within and between utterances. When intervals occur, they are timed in tenths of seconds. Okay, that's what you don't have to do. You don't have to try and time it in tenths of seconds. Between utterance, but basically if it's super long, anything that's a second or longer, you'll be able to say 1 Mississippi. Right? If you can say 1 Mississippi, that's a second. So you can actually mark that as a second, right? But you don't have to, or a second, 2 seconds, for example. If, for example, you're speaking with children, there is often a turn delay, what's called a turn delay. So you say something and the child sits there and says nothing for, a few seconds, and then you often might use a prompt, and then hopefully there's the turn comes in. But those turn delays are, if you're looking at non-native speakers, or if you're looking at children and adults, those turn delays are part of the system. That's one thing that you're going to discuss because it's part of the way that the system is being changed by the speakers. So untimed intervals heard between utterances are described with double, between utterances. I think they actually mean the length there. You would just put the length, or now another thing that you can do with pauses, if you don't want to deal with lengths, is you can use this. So this is like a little pause, a little dot between parentheses. And if it's it feels to you like a sort of medium pause, then it's dot, dot. So I'm okay with you using dot and dot, dot. And then if it's a super long pause, count it like physically yourself and just put it between parentheses. Yeah.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Can we tell the participants that we want to record you?
Sure.
And not make it like spontaneous.
Sure, you can. Yes, you can. That's fine. I mean, but also you don't. What are you thinking of a specific?
Yeah, just like my friends in Lebanon, asking them to record something and send it to me.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Yeah. But make sure if they record something and send it to you, that what they're recording is, longer, much longer than what you need. Right. So maybe say record a 10-minute conversation. Yeah. And you're going to have just, 1 to 2 minutes of that. Yeah. Good. Be careful if you're going to use multi-party talk. What happens in multi-party talk?
The interruption.
Yep. People interrupt each other, they latch, they do all kinds of things. So it's fine if you want, but remember that makes your transcription job a little bit harder to do. Yeah. But multi-party talk is very interesting because you can really get to see the system, how people are like, in multi-party talk, somehow they have to get in. And so you can see the system on how they get into multi-party, and it's different from how you get in if it's dyadic, because usually then there's some pauses that you can jump in on. So so it's interesting. Yeah. Good. Any other questions? I know there is another one other than Soundscriber, because one of my students has used something else. Yeah. Okay, so you've got 2 weeks to do that. That's due 21st. And then your reading post, we've already talked about. It's a short article. It's not a super long article. And I just want you to really say, okay, this was his theory. What did Tyler, Tyler basically saying, I don't think this theory is going to work. It doesn't work. Let me show the evidence of why it doesn't work. What data she uses to explain her argument and so on is really what you're looking at. Okay. Any questions? Okay, if you've got questions or concerns, particularly out there that you want me to bring up in class, I mean, if you've got questions, shoot me an email and I will. The chances are if you have a question, somebody else does. So I can certainly address those next week. And the same with everybody here too, right?
So just do next Sunday, not this Sunday.
Yeah, you've got 2 weeks to do it. Yeah.
At this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Are you so far into the semester you've now forgotten what day a day is? And, yeah. Anything else?
Mine is a teeny clarification. So our analysis is based on Goffman's, so we're looking at the characteristics that we see in the transcript and how it aligns with what Goffman says? Or?
Yes, the characteristics that you're interested in are the characteristics that Goffman talks about. Yeah. You're interested in looking at these kinds of system constraints. That's what you're interested in. Yeah. Yeah. So we're not interested in you doing a full-scale analysis of everything. We're interested in you identifying the system constraints that Goffman says happen in all conversation and how they're being shown in your conversation. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we don't draw any conclusions from it.
I don't understand what that means.
So, for example, if we see a lot of back channeling, for example, do we draw a conclusion from it, or are we just saying that?
Or what conclusion would you draw from it?
That maybe they're agreeing with each other, or if they're not enough, we say that they're not.
Okay, so you should be making any conclusions that are warranted by your analysis. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, let me clarify my question. I wanted to know if we're saying, okay, here are some features from this transcript done, or here are some features, and here's what I think that these features mean.
Yeah. So here are the features, and here's what's happening with the system, what they mean within the system. So, for example, if one of your features is long-term delays, you would say one of the features is long-term delays. One of the reasons that there are long-term delays, or the reason that there is, may well be because I've got a job, or maybe because I've got a non-native speaker, or, one reason why I have multiple weird back channels, maybe because it's a non-native speaker who's not used to speaking, so yes, you want to conclude something that's warranted in your analysis, absolutely, yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for being so patient with the, and thanks for spotting it before I went on too long. Yeah. You must have had an instinct that it was all darkness over there. Yeah. Now I'm looking at it every 2 seconds. I'm like, is that still on? So, yeah. Good. All right, guys. Thanks very much. Let's hope it's not chucking it down with rain out there because I don't have no rain.